I watched her walk through the door with unsteady steps, the smell of alcohol permeating her clothes and her smudged lipstick betraying everything I already feared. She tried to smile, but her slurred words made my stomach turn. I stared at her, unable to hide the contempt and pain that burned inside. "It's all over," I said, each word carrying a weight that seemed to crush the ground beneath my feet. She blinked, as if she didn't understand, as if it wasn't possible for those words to come out of my mouth. But they left. And they echoed. Through the room, through my mind, through the marriage that, until that night, I believed was real. I wanted her to deny it, to say anything that would shatter the image of her in the arms of another man that had already begun to form in my head. I wanted her to scream that she was sorry, to cry, to beg. But she just stood there, staring at me as if I were to blame for the situation. As if I was the one who destroyed everything. And that's when I realized, there were no more us. The us had died the moment she chose to be with someone else and return home as if nothing had happened. She tried to speak, but I raised my hand. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear about lame excuses or empty explanations. You think I don't know? Do you think I don't notice the averted glances, the extended hours, the hidden messages? And now this here, I gestured, pointing to the rumpled clothes, the smudged lipstick and the ring on my finger that seemed to burn my vision. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Nothing. Her silence was like gasoline poured onto the fire that was already burning inside me. I picked up the suitcase she had thrown at the entrance and threw it against the wall. The bang made her finally react, taking a few steps back, but without taking her eyes off mine. I wondered if she was sorry. I wondered if at some point that night, while she was with him, she thought of me. And that's what hurt the most. Because I knew the answer was no. That night, while I waited for her, I planned a surprise, a dinner, something that would rekindle the flame that, I thought, was just weakened by time. She was in another place. Laughing. Drinking. Being played. She was giving someone else what I thought was mine alone. And now it was there, in front of me, as if waiting for forgiveness. As if he thought I would just forget. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She looked at the floor, and the silence was the confirmation I needed. "Who were you with?" I insisted, but she remained silent. That's when I knew she didn't have the courage to say it. Because saying it out loud would make it real. And she knew that if she said so, there would be no going back. But I didn't need to hear it. I already knew. I already knew why the smell of cheap perfume that permeated her clothes wasn't mine. I already knew because the friends' laughter, the excuses about drinking too much, the smudged makeup, all of that screamed a truth that I didn't want to accept. "You lied to me," my voice was shaky, and I hated it. I wanted to look strong. I wanted her to see that I wasn't begging, but the truth was, I was. I was begging it wasn't real. Let it be a nightmare. But the look in her eyes, that empty look, told me everything. "You destroyed everything," I whispered. "Everything we built, all the promises." She took a step forward, but I moved away. I didn't want her to touch me. Because I knew that if I let her, I might not be able to let her go. But at the same time, how could I continue? How could I look at her and not see another man? Not seeing the betrayal written all over her face every time she smiled. "It was just a mistake," she said finally. But I laughed. Because that wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a stumble. It was a choice. And choices have consequences. She tried to explain, tried to justify herself, but I no longer listened. My mind was spinning, remembering all the times I ignored the signs, when I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I had trusted her. I had given her everything. And in return, I received this. My head throbbed, and the silence between us grew. She looked at me with eyes full of tears, but I refused to believe they were real. Because how can someone you love do that? How can someone who claims to love destroy another person like that? I thought about all the nights I waited for her. On all ignored messages. In all the bad excuses given. And I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. For being blind. But at the same time, I hated myself for still wanting to believe her. For still wanting her to say she loved me. But there was nothing more to be said. I turned around, trying to breathe, trying to stay calm, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't what you thought, wasn't it? So what was it? Because the smudged lipstick, the smell of alcohol, the guilt written all over her face, everything said the opposite. So tell me what happened, I shouted. But she just cried. I turned to leave that place, to get away from her, but something stopped me. A voice in my head. And as much as I wanted to ignore her, I couldn't. Because something didn't make sense. Something was wrong. I slowly turned to face her, and that's when it hit me. She wasn't just scared. She was desperate. And at that moment, I knew there was more. Something she didn't want me to find out. Something that could change everything. And it was there, at that moment, that I understood that the worst was yet to come. Welcome to the channel where we reveal the dark secrets of betrayal and its devastating consequences. Here, we make it clear, we do not support or justify any type of betrayal. All stories presented are fictional, created to show how infidelity can destroy lives, relationships and trust. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is shocking, intense and unforgettable. Take a breath, the story is about to begin. Alex has always been a man of principle. Growing up in a traditional family, he valued loyalty above all else. From an early age, he learned from his father, a dedicated carpenter, that trust was the basis of any relationship. He carried this belief with him into adulthood and especially into marriage. When he met Laura, he knew he had found someone special. She was vibrant, full of energy and had a charming way of making simple moments unforgettable. From their first meeting, he was attracted to her spontaneity and the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about her dreams. It didn't take long for them to fall in love. The relationship grew quickly but solidly, full of promises about the future and carefully laid plans for building a life together. Laura worked with events and was surrounded by parties and celebrations. She loved her job, even if it meant long nights and unpredictable hours. Alex, on the other hand, was an accountant and maintained a stable routine, with fixed hours and few unexpected events. Despite their differences, they worked well together. She brought lightness to his organized, methodical life, and he offered balance to her hectic energy. Close friends used to say that they were the perfect couple, and they themselves believed it. In the early years, the relationship seemed unshakable. Trips, romantic dinners and movie nights on the couch were frequent, and any disagreements were quickly resolved with an honest conversation. The house they purchased was spacious and cozy, decorated with details that reflected their personalities. Laura loved color and had vibrant paintings spread across the walls, while Alex kept his office impeccably organized. Their home was a reflection of the mix of styles and personalities that united them. In the eyes of those on the outside, they formed a perfect duo, a model couple to be followed. But like any marriage, over time, small cracks began to appear. Alex began to feel that Laura was increasingly absent. The messages that were once constant decreased, the spontaneous dinners became rare and, on the nights when she arrived late, he noticed that her enthusiasm when walking through the door had lost some of its shine. At first, Alex tried to justify it to himself. I knew that Laura's work required a lot of dedication and difficult hours. He himself had been through stressful periods at work and knew how it could affect his mood. But, over time, her absence began to hurt in a different way. It wasn't just the physical emptiness, but the emotional disconnection. When I tried to talk, Laura said she was tired and changed the subject. At times, he felt that she was distant even when they were together. Quick glances at her cell phone during dinner and vague answers when he asked about her day began to create a shadow in the relationship. Alex tried hard not to let insecurity take over. He was a rational man and preferred to believe in facts, not assumptions. However, an uncomfortable feeling began to form in his chest, something he couldn't ignore. He tried to compensate for the signs with romantic gestures, preparing special dinners and leaving affectionate notes around the house, but he felt that something was slipping through his fingers. Laura, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice or, worse, didn't care. She smiled and thanked the gestures, but without the same intensity as before. He started paying more attention to small details. The subtle changes in Laura's habits, such as changing her perfume without commenting, spending more time getting ready to go out and her excited tone when talking on the phone. Alex tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that it was just silly insecurity. After all, Laura has always been outgoing and full of friends. But something inside him prevented him from pushing aside his doubts. One day, while cleaning the house, he found an earring on the floor of the car. He knew it wasn't hers, but he didn't ask anything. Instead, he put the object in the drawer and waited for an opportunity to bring up the subject. When he finally asked, Laura laughed and said that a friend probably dropped it during a ride, but the explanation didn't completely convince him. Even so, he swallowed his distrust and moved on. Alex began to notice that his and Laura's routine had become almost mechanical. Conversations were short, kisses were hurried and nights together became increasingly rare. She blamed it on tiredness and overwork, and he tried to understand. But deep down, something screamed that there was more. On the rare nights they slept together, Alex noticed the distance between their bodies. Even though they were lying side by side, there was an invisible abyss that he couldn't cross. As much as he tried to remain calm, Alex began to question whether he still knew the woman he had married. Memories of the past seemed distant and almost unreal. The easy laugh, the knowing looks and shared plans began to seem like an illusion. Even so, he insisted on believing that they could find their way back. Laura, in turn, acted as if nothing had changed. I kept going out with friends and coming back late, always with excuses ready. Alex waited awake, even when he knew it was no use. Every time I heard the sound of the keys in the door, my heart sank, wondering what would happen if I asked too much. He knew he wasn't ready for the answer, whatever it was. Despite the growing tension, Alex didn't give up. He insisted on planning a trip, something to rekindle the flame that seemed to be going out. Laura accepted the idea with a smile, but over the next few days she acted as if she had completely forgotten about the plan. He tried to ignore it, but he felt the weight of her indifference. When the day finally arrived for Laura to go out to a party with her friends, Alex decided not to insist. She promised to come back early, but he knew she wouldn't. Sitting on the couch, with the clock ticking away, he realized he had reached his limit. And when he saw her walk through the door that night, something inside him broke. Alex spent the next few days trying to ignore the restlessness that came over him. Laura's words, forced smiles and hasty explanations began to seem more rehearsed than sincere. He tried to push the thoughts away, but it was like fighting a current. Every detail that previously seemed insignificant now seemed loaded with meaning. The messages she deleted before she even finished reading, the calls she rejected as soon as he entered the room, the times that never matched what she said. Everything was a constant reminder that something was wrong, but he still didn't have the courage to face the truth. On nights when Laura said she would work late, Alex found himself looking at his cell phone, waiting for a message that never arrived. He tried to occupy his mind with work, watched movies or read books, but nothing could take away the feeling of emptiness. Even the objects scattered around the house began to bother him. The photos of them together that seemed older than they really were, her clothes hanging haphazardly in the closet, the perfume that lingered in the air when she left. Everything reminded him of what they once were and what they seemed to have lost. That Friday, Laura left once again saying she would meet her friends for dinner. Alex tried to smile and wished she had fun, but something inside him knew that tonight would be different. He sat in the room for hours, pretending he wasn't waiting for time to pass. Every minute seemed longer, and the silence in the house made his mind create scenes he couldn't shake. When he looked at the clock and realized it was already past midnight, he felt his heart speed up. He took out his cell phone and sent a short message, just asking if everything was okay. Time passed, and the screen remained off. After another hour of waiting, Alex got in the car and left. He drove through the streets, not knowing exactly where to go, until he stopped in front of the bar that Laura used to go to with her friends. He watched the movement for a while, trying to recognize her car in the parking lot, but found nothing. He called again, and this time the phone rang until it went to voicemail. The feeling of anguish turned into something heavier, a bitter certainty that he didn't want to accept. Dawn was advancing when he finally returned home. He parked the car in the garage and stayed there for a few minutes, trying to breathe deeply. When he entered, the sound of keys echoed in the empty room. He left his coat on the sofa and went up to the bedroom, where the bed was still made, as he had left it. He felt his chest tighten, but he fought the urge to give in to his anger. When he finally heard the sound of the door being unlocked, he slowly went downstairs. Laura stumbled in, the strong smell of alcohol filling the room before he could even see her face. She tried to turn on the light, but tripped over her own feet. Alex caught her arm before she fell and, at that moment, he noticed her smudged lipstick and messy hair. She tried to smile, but his expression made her freeze. Alex didn't say anything, just slowly released her and took a step back. Laura opened her mouth, but no words came out. He noticed her gaze shifting away, avoiding looking at him directly, and it was enough to make his stomach turn. He tried to remain calm, but his breathing was already heavy. He asked where she was, but the answer came weak and full of pauses. She said she stayed late with her friends, but her voice was shaking. Anger began to grow. Alex pointed to the mirror in the hallway, forcing her to look at herself. Laura hesitated, and he insisted until she finally looked at her reflection. The smudged lipstick, the disheveled hair, the red marks on her neck. She ran her hand over her face quickly, as if trying to erase the traces, but it was too late. Alex crossed his arms and waited. Laura started talking quickly, saying that her friends insisted they stay a little longer, that she drank too much and that perhaps she was exaggerating by leaving like that. But Alex didn't move. Each word seemed to fuel more of the fury he was trying to contain. When he finally asked who it was, her silence was the confirmation he feared. She tried to get closer, saying he was seeing everything wrong, but Alex backed away. His heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode. The pain was mixed with anger, with disappointment, with something he couldn't even name. He asked again, louder this time. I wanted to know where he had been, who he had been with, and Laura broke down. Tears began to fall, and her words became a desperate plea for him to listen to her. He said it wasn't what it seemed, that he had lost control and that it didn't mean anything. But Alex couldn't hear anymore. He walked back and forth, trying to make sense of it all, but every detail only confirmed what he already knew. Laura tried to touch his arm, but he moved away again. She said she couldn't believe it, that after everything they had built, she had thrown it all away like that. She cried, begged him to forgive her, but Alex couldn't look at her without feeling disgusted by what had happened. He asked if it had happened before, if this was the first mistake or just the first one he discovered. Laura shook her head, saying no, it was just that night, but Alex didn't know if he could believe it. He wanted to get out of there, but at the same time he felt like he needed to stay and see it through to the end. I needed to hear every word, every apology, so that I could finally accept what had happened. His eyes were fixed on hers when he finally asked her name. Laura's hesitation made his blood run cold. When she finally said the name, Alex felt like he'd been punched. He knew. And it was there, at that moment, that everything changed. Alex remained standing in the middle of the room, his face hardened, while Laura curled up on the couch, unable to hold his gaze. The silence between them was heavy, almost suffocating, filled only by the sound of her suppressed crying and his irregular breathing. He wanted to scream, he wanted to demand answers, but something inside him kept him still, as if he feared that any movement would make him fall apart once and for all. Her eyes were red, swollen, and her hands were shaking as she tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Alex crossed his arms and stared at her, waiting for her to finally say what was stuck in her throat. Laura opened her mouth, but her voice broke on the first try. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and tried again. He said he had made a mistake, that none of it had been planned and that he never wanted to hurt him. Alex laughed, a bitter laugh that echoed through the room, cutting off any attempt by her to continue. He asked if this was a mistake or a choice. Laura looked at the ground, and her silence was the answer he was already expecting. When Alex stepped forward, she shrank further into the couch. He stopped, took a deep breath and asked the name again. Laura hesitated, and the delay made his stomach turn. When she finally said the name, Alex went still. Her eyes were fixed on him now, begging for understanding, but all he felt was an overwhelming wave of anger and disbelief. That was the last person he would imagine. A friend. Someone he had known for years, someone who had come into their home, sat at their table, toasted with them at birthdays and celebrations. Alex felt the world spin, as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He ran his hands over his face, trying to make sense of it, but everything seemed like a blur. Laura started to speak quickly, saying that she didn't know how it happened, that she felt alone and vulnerable, but Alex raised his hand, telling her to stop. He wanted to understand. He wanted to know how someone who claimed to love him could destroy everything like that. He asked if they had planned it, if they had laughed at him while pretending to be friends. Laura desperately denied it, saying it was never intentional, but her every word sounded like another knife stuck in his chest. He paced from side to side, trying to control his breathing and the urge to break everything around him. Laura got up, approaching cautiously, saying she wanted to explain, but Alex backed away. He asked how long it had been going on, and Laura hesitated before answering that it had started a few months ago. Alex closed his eyes and shook his head, feeling as if every piece of the life they had built together was crumbling before him. When he opened his eyes again, Laura was still there, asking him to forgive her, saying it was just a moment of weakness, but Alex couldn't hear it anymore. He remembered the nights he waited, the messages he ignored, the signs he insisted on not seeing. He asked if they had been together in their house, in the place that should be sacred to both of them. Laura was silent, and Alex felt his chest tighten. He took a step back, as if he needed space to process this. Laura began to cry louder, saying that she knew she had made a mistake, that she regretted it, and that she would do anything to make it right. Alex laughed again, but this time there was more pain than anger. He asked her how she thought something like that could be fixed. How could she look at him and think that an apology would be enough to erase everything she had done? The anger that burned inside him mixed with an overwhelming sadness. He wanted to hate her, he wanted to throw her out of the house and never see her again, but part of him was still stuck with the memories of what they had been. They thought about the happy moments, the promises, the nights they felt invincible, and that only made everything more painful. Laura kept talking, asking him not to give up on them, but Alex shook his head, unable to believe that there was still an us after all that. It was then that Laura looked at him with a different desperation. He said he needed to tell him something more, that there was something he didn't know. Alex interrupted her, saying that nothing she said would change what had already happened. But Laura insisted, saying it was important. He crossed his arms, waiting, but her voice trailed off again. When he finally managed to speak, what he said made Alex feel the ground disappear beneath his feet once again. Laura said that her friend, the man she cheated on him with, had looked for her months before, not by chance, but with a purpose. She said he knew things about Alex, things she couldn't ignore. He threatened her, used information that could destroy everything they had built. He said that if she didn't find him, he would reveal secrets that Alex was hiding from her. Alex stood still, trying to process the words. He asked what those secrets were, but Laura just shook her head, saying that she didn't know everything, that she only knew that the man claimed to have something against him. Alex felt his heart speed up. He asked her why she didn't look for him, why she didn't tell him anything. Laura cried as she said she was scared, that she didn't want to lose everything. She said she thought she could handle it alone, that everything would be fine, but her words only increased his anger and confusion. He demanded to know more. I wanted to understand what the other man knew, but Laura kept repeating that she didn't know the details. She said she gave in because she was desperate, that she did it to protect their marriage, but Alex couldn't believe it. He walked away, running his hands through his hair, trying to put together the pieces of that puzzle that seemed to get more complicated by the second. Laura kept asking for forgiveness, saying that everything she did was out of fear of losing Alex, but he couldn't listen anymore. His mind was spinning, trying to process not only the betrayal, but also the secret that now hung over them like a dark cloud. He looked at her one last time before grabbing his keys and walking out the door, leaving her crying in the middle of the room. As he drove, Alex felt his chest tighten. I needed to find out the truth. He needed to know what the other man knew and, more than that, he needed to decide what he would do with it all. The sound of the engine seemed to echo his thoughts, and the image of Laura crying on the couch continued to haunt him. But deep down, he knew that this was just the first part of something much bigger that was to come. Alex drove aimlessly for a while, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His breathing was heavy, his heart was beating so fast it seemed to want to come out of his chest. Laura's voice echoed in his mind, repeating disjointed words about threats, secrets and fear. He tried to push the thoughts away, but every detail came back like a blow. His friend's name, Laura's apologies, her tears, everything mixed together and suffocated him. When he realized it, he was already parked in front of a small bar on the other side of the city. He didn't know how he got there, but he got out of the car and went inside, sitting at the counter. He ordered a whiskey and took the first sip without thinking, feeling the liquid burn in his throat. The drink did not bring relief. In fact, it only made the anger come back stronger. He picked up his phone and stared at the screen for a few seconds before finally opening the messaging app. The old conversations with the cheating friend were still there, full of jokes, plans and conversations about trust. Alex felt a knot in his stomach as he thought that all this time he had been deceived. Decided to call. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. He tried again, with the same result. Frustrated, Alex left the bar and returned to his car. I needed answers and I knew exactly where to find him. He drove to the address he knew by heart, an apartment in the center. When he arrived, he rang the doorbell several times, but no one answered. The porch light was on, and he knew the man was inside. She knocked hard on the door, calling his name, until finally she heard footsteps on the other side. The door opened just a crack, and his friend's face appeared. Alex didn't wait for explanations. He pushed the door and entered, making the other man step back. The apartment was a mess, with empty bottles scattered around and clothes thrown on the floor. The man tried to speak, but Alex interrupted him, demanding to know the truth. I wanted to know what he had against him, what he had said to manipulate Laura like that. The other tried to deflect, saying he didn't know what Alex was talking about, but his voice was shaking, and his eyes avoided direct contact. Alex lunged forward, cornering him against the wall. He repeated the question, this time louder, more threatening. That was when the man finally gave in. He admitted he knew about the money. About the business that Alex had hidden from Laura. He said he had evidence, documents that could destroy him and the reputation he valued so much. He said Laura only knew part of the story, but it was enough to make her give in. Alex felt the world spin. Laura knew. She knew he had lied about the money, about the finances, about the decisions he made without consulting her. Everything to protect the marriage, to avoid fights, but now everything was exposed. He asked how the man had gotten the information, and the answer made him feel even more betrayed. The friend had used proximity to collect details, access folders and documents during visits, exploiting the trust that Alex never hesitated to give. The anger rose again, and Alex grabbed the other's shirt, lifting him off the ground. He asked if he really thought he could destroy everything he had built and get away with it. The man tried to free himself, saying he never wanted to get to this point, that he just wanted something to pressure him. But Alex couldn't hear anything else. He let go of him, making him fall to the floor, and left the apartment before he did something he might regret. When he returned home, Laura was still on the sofa, her eyes red from crying. She stood up when she saw him enter, but he raised his hand, telling her to stop. He said he knew everything now, that he had heard it directly from the other person. He asked her why she hadn't trusted him, why she chose to betray him rather than face him. Laura started to speak, but Alex interrupted her. He said he wanted to hear the truth, the whole truth, and that this time he wouldn't accept empty excuses. Laura hesitated, but finally started counting. She said when she found out about the money she was devastated. She felt that he had broken their trust, that he had made important decisions without even consulting her. She said she felt betrayed, as if their partnership had been a lie. It was in this moment of vulnerability that the friend approached, offering comfort and understanding. She claimed that she didn't plan anything, that things just happened, but Alex couldn't accept that justification. He asked her if she thought what she did was justifiable, that betrayal could be the answer to a mistake. Laura cried, saying she knew she was wrong, that she was weak, but that she still loved him. He said all he wanted was to protect him, to protect the marriage. Alex laughed, a laugh full of bitterness, and asked how she thought she could protect something by destroying it at the same time. She tried to get closer, saying she was sorry, that she would do anything to make it right. But Alex pulled away again, saying he didn't know if he could forgive her. He said it wasn't just about the act, but about what it represented, the breach of trust, the emotional abandonment, the choice to put another man above himself. Laura fell to her knees, begging for a chance, but Alex turned away, feeling the weight of everything he had discovered. He looked at the photos on the wall, at the furniture they had chosen together, at everything they had built. He thought about the time invested, the love he thought would be enough to overcome anything. But now everything seemed broken, beyond repair. Laura kept asking him not to give up, but he knew that it wasn't just up to him anymore. Before leaving, Alex looked at her one last time. He said he needed time, that he needed to think. And he left Laura alone in the room, crying and clinging to the last hope that she could still save them. As the door closed behind him, Alex knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. Alex left the house with heavy steps, feeling the cold night air touch his face as he tried to organize the thoughts that were spinning out of control. Laura's voice still echoed in his mind, each word filled with apologies and promises that seemed empty in the face of the damage. He didn't know where he was going, but he needed to get out of there, he needed to get away from the confusion that seemed to suffocate him within those walls. He walked through the streets, lost in memories and assumptions, until he found a bench in an almost deserted square. He sat down and rested his elbows on his knees, burying his face in his hands. He couldn't stop thinking about the way it all fell apart so quickly. The years of partnership, the promises, the happy moments, now seemed like distant fragments of another life. He felt torn between the pain of betrayal and the weight of the secret he himself had kept. He knew that hiding his financial problems was a mistake, but he never imagined that it could pave the way for the collapse he now faced. As much as he tried to convince himself that Laura was also wrong, he couldn't ignore the guilt he carried. After all, he was the one who initiated the breach of trust, and that failure had created cracks deep enough to allow another man to infiltrate their lives. He got up and started walking again, unable to sit still. His traitorous friend's words still echoed in his mind, each sentence filled with malice and manipulation. He felt angry, not only for what the other had done, but also for having allowed him to get so close. She let him become part of their daily lives, share intimate conversations and celebrate important moments, only to discover that, behind it all, there were hidden intentions. The weight of the humiliation was suffocating, but more than that, the feeling of helplessness gnawed at him from within. He couldn't accept that he had been fooled so easily, that he didn't notice the signs until it was too late. After hours of wandering, Alex finally returned home. The light was still on, and he knew Laura would be waiting. When he entered, he found her sitting on the edge of the sofa, with her eyes swollen and her hands clutching a glass of water. She looked at him, waiting for some reaction, but he just leaned against the wall, not knowing what to say. She started to speak, saying that she was willing to do whatever was necessary to fix everything, but he interrupted her, saying that it wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. Laura got up and approached, saying that she needed him to understand why everything had happened. She said she felt lost, that his separation from her because of work and the secrets he kept left her vulnerable. She admitted that she should have talked, but she was too scared to face the situation. Alex shook her head, saying that nothing justified what she did. She insisted, saying that she knew that, but that she also knew that he still loved her, that there was something between them that was worth saving. He stared at her for a long moment, fighting the mix of emotions he felt. Part of him wanted to believe that they could overcome this, that the love they had built was strong enough to withstand the betrayal. But another part knew something had been broken, something that might never be restored. He asked her if she really thought they could continue, if she could look at him every day without seeing the man she betrayed. Laura cried, saying she would do anything to prove she was sincere, but he turned away, feeling that her words no longer had the same weight. The following days were marked by uncomfortable silences and failed attempts at reconstruction. Laura tried hard to show remorse, cooking dinners, leaving notes, trying to start conversations. Alex, on the other hand, fluctuated between moments of anger and apathy. He wanted to believe there was hope, but every time he looked at her, the images of what he had discovered came back with a vengeance. He felt trapped in a cycle of pain and mistrust that he couldn't break. He decided to seek counseling, not out of hope of saving the marriage, but to try to understand his own feelings. During the sessions, he realized that the fear of failure was holding him back as much as the love he still felt for Laura. He blamed himself for not realizing it sooner, for letting the problems pile up, but he also knew he couldn't continue if he didn't find a way to forgive. The therapist suggested that he write a letter to Laura, expressing everything he felt, but Alex couldn't put his feelings into words. One night, while organizing documents in the office, he found an envelope that Laura had left on the table. It was a handwritten letter from her, where she confessed every detail of her involvement with her friend. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but she needed him to know that she was willing to lose everything to try to win him back. Alex read the letter several times, feeling the weight of the words but also the sincerity in them. He went to the bedroom and found her lying down, looking at the ceiling with red eyes. He sat on the edge of the bed and held her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers. He said he still didn't know what to do, but that he was willing to try to take it one step at a time. Laura threw herself into his arms, crying, but Alex didn't return the hug. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey, and that forgiveness, if it came, would take time. Over the next few days, they started talking more, but the shadow of the past still hung over them. Alex decided to confront his cheating friend once again, this time with Laura by his side. When they found him, he tried to justify himself, but Laura was firm in saying that she no longer wanted to have any type of contact. Alex saw the discomfort on the other man's face and felt a strange sense of closure, but he also knew that it didn't erase what had happened. Back home, Alex and Laura began to rebuild routines, but the weight of betrayal was still present. Alex knew he needed to decide if he could continue living with this or if it was better to move forward alone. As he looked at Laura that night, he saw fear and hope in her eyes, and he realized that the greatest dilemma was yet to come. Alex woke up that morning feeling the weight of the last few days as if he had carried an impossible burden. He looked around the room and noticed the emptiness next to him. Laura had already left, as she had done in the last few weeks, trying to give him space to process everything that had happened. The silence in the house was almost deafening, and he knew that this was the moment to finally make a decision. As much as he tried to hold on to any shred of hope, he knew that something inside him had changed forever. He got up slowly and walked to the bathroom, where the mirror reflected a face he almost didn't recognize. The sunken eyes, the more pronounced expression lines and the visible tiredness told the story of sleepless nights and thoughts that consumed him. As he washed his face, he remembered his last conversation with Laura. She had cried, begged for one more chance, promised she would do anything to prove she loved him. But Alex couldn't forget the images that tormented him, the words exchanged between the two of them in that room, the confessions that seemed to pierce every part of his body. He knew Laura was sorry, but he also knew that her regret didn't erase the choices she made. And that was what hurt him the most. Because even after everything, he still missed her. She missed what they had been, what they could have continued to be if she had chosen differently. He got dressed quickly and left the house. He needed answers, clarity, and he knew he could only get that by facing the ghosts that still haunted him. He got in the car and drove to the office where Laura worked. When he arrived, he saw her outside, talking to a colleague, but he stayed in the car for a few minutes, watching. Laura looked tired, haggard, but she still had that sparkle in her eyes that had attracted him in the first place. He wondered how something so beautiful had turned into something so painful. He got out of the car and walked towards her. Laura turned around and, upon seeing him, let out a relieved sigh, as if she had been waiting for that moment. She asked if he wanted to talk, and Alex nodded. They walked together to a nearby park, where they sat on a bench away from them. Laura started to speak first, saying that she knew he would probably never be able to forgive her, but that she needed him to know that the betrayal wasn't due to a lack of love. She said she was lost, afraid of losing her marriage, and made decisions that now haunt her. Alex listened silently, letting her finish before finally responding. He asked her if she really believed that love justified that, if she thought he could forget what he saw, what he heard, and simply move on as if nothing had happened. Laura started crying, but Alex remained calm, saying he wasn't there to fight. He said he needed closure, that he needed to understand what was really left between them. Laura said she still loved him, that she was willing to fight for the marriage, but Alex shook his head. He said love wasn't enough when trust had been destroyed like that. He admitted that he had also been wrong, that the secrets he had created an abyss between them, but he made it clear that nothing justified the betrayal. Laura held his hand, begging for one more chance, but Alex slowly pulled away. He said their love had been real, but now it was broken, and as much as he wanted to believe they could fix it, he knew he would never look at her the same way again. He got up and left without looking back, leaving Laura sitting on the bench, crying. He knew this decision would be painful, but he also knew he needed to move on. In the following days, he began to organize his life, look for a new place to live and close the cycle that had been their marriage. Laura tried to look for him a few times, but he kept his distance, focusing on rebuilding his life alone. Meanwhile, the former friend who caused chaos in his life was also facing the consequences. After Alex handed over the documents he had to his lawyer, the man lost his job and was sued for breach of confidential information. He tried to justify himself, but ended up falling into disgrace, losing not only his reputation but also the trust of the few people who were still by his side. Alex found out about this from a third party, but he didn't allow himself to feel satisfaction. I knew that revenge wouldn't change what happened and that the true triumph would be moving forward and finding peace. A few weeks later, Alex met a new woman while on a business trip. She was different from Laura, more reserved, but with a gentleness that made him feel something he thought he would never feel again. They started with casual conversations, and soon found themselves messaging each other and finding excuses to see each other again. Alex was cautious, afraid to open up, but little by little he allowed that feeling to grow. I knew I still carried scars, but I also knew I deserved a second chance at happiness. Laura, on the other hand, struggled to rebuild her own life. She tried to move on, but guilt followed her wherever she went. She knew that she had lost Alex because of her own choices and that regret, no matter how strong, could not change the past. He tried to seek help, find new paths, but he always felt that something was missing. Deep down, I knew I would never meet someone like him again. In the end, Alex moved on, stronger, more mature and determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Laura was left behind, trapped in the consequences of the decisions she made, trying to find redemption on a path she now had to walk alone. Now we want to know what you thought of this story. Leave your comment with your opinion and tell us which part impacted you the most. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Remember, this channel does not support cheating of any kind, and all stories are fictional, created to show how choices can have devastating consequences. Thank you for following us here.